In a shocking turn of events, the PFL has launched a full-scale assault on the UFC's dominance, signing former champions and undefeated prospects with multi-million-dollar contracts and complete career freedom. Behind the scenes, Dana White is scrambling to contain the chaos as his empire begins to crack.
For all the kind words, I appreciate it. I am so tired. Literally said nothing to them, never spoke to them or anything. That entire story was an absolute bull lie. The craziest thing we've ever seen.
Has the UFC finally met its match? Let's find out. Dana White is losing his composure as the PFL's bold recruitment spree sends shockwaves through the MMA world. The game changed overnight when the Professional Fighters League purchased Bellator MMA for roughly $100 million in late 2023. With that move, PFL evolved from a niche tournament brand into a powerhouse rival. But what really set Dana off wasn't just the Bellator buyout. It was watching his fighters abandon ship for the new league he once dismissed.
For all the kind words, I appreciate it. I am so tired of doing podcasts. I'm literally done with them. I'm not doing any more podcasts.
Dana White's first major meltdown came during the UFC Vegas 73 press conference in May 2023, shortly after Francis Ngannou inked his landmark deal with the PFL. The UFC boss unleashed a tirade, disguised as analysis, dripping with sarcasm, as he called Ngannou's contract genius, while questioning every aspect of PFL's business model.
PFL's going to pay this guy to train for a boxing match that may not even happen and that they might not even be involved in. How does that make any sense? It doesn't make sense to me. I mean, Anthony Joshua called it a gimmick fight this week.
White's rant spiraled into a full-blown teardown, accusing Ngannou of playing it safe and mocking PFL's financial strategy. He painted the organization as reckless spenders, burning through Saudi investment cash like there's no tomorrow.
Francis wants to take zero risks. Doesn't want to take any chances. And he obviously didn't want to take a chance against John Jones. And after we saw what happened with Cyril Gane, I don't blame him. I think the outcome would have been exactly the same. I'm sure most of you do, and I'm sure Francis does too. And the media makes it sound like that I'm saying that he's afraid of him. I don't think that he's afraid of anybody. It's just the fact that he doesn't want to take any risks.
According to Dana White, Francis Ngannou wanted to take no risks. He claimed the former heavyweight champion refused to face John Jones and was essentially getting paid just to train for boxing matches that might never happen. White also accused the PFL of reckless spending, noting that the organization was reportedly raising between $280 and $300 million from Middle Eastern investors, all while struggling with low ratings and minimal ticket sales. To him, the entire operation made zero sense. But the irony became clear when Ngannou's debut later drew 1.2 million pay-per-view buys, a figure that suggested White's outrage might have been more about frustration than logic. Fans immediately split into two camps. Social media erupted with debate. Some celebrated Ngannou for breaking free from UFC's control and using his leverage masterfully, while others accused him of dodging the John Jones super fight. On Reddit, MMA threads exploded with thousands of upvotes as fans dissected every angle. One viral comment even declared, "Ngannou just changed the game forever." Still, not everyone was convinced. Hardcore UFC loyalists backed White, arguing that Ngannou had priced himself out of the sport's premier league. They pointed to the UFC's unmatched star power, production quality, and ability to deliver blockbuster fights, dismissing the PFL as the minor leagues with a major league wallet. Meanwhile, PFL CEO Peter Murray took a more visionary stance, calling Ngannou's signing transformational for the industry, not only as a move for an elite athlete, but as a statement of power from a fighter who refused to be just another employee. Peter Murray's comments made it clear the PFL wasn't just collecting champions. They were building a new system, one that could redefine how fighters approach their careers and negotiate their value. That bold philosophy was soon put to the test with Muhammad Mokaev's shocking departure in July 2024. Undefeated at 7-0, ranked number 6 in the UFC flyweight division, and considered one of the brightest young stars in MMA. Yet somehow, the UFC let him walk. At the UFC 304 press conference, Dana White downplayed the loss with thinly veiled satisfaction, saying the PFL was getting a great undefeated guy while hinting that matchmakers weren't fans of Mokayev's attitude. The message between the lines was unmistakable. Fall in line with the UFC system, or find yourself on the outside looking in. Fans immediately interpreted this as retaliation. Social media erupted with claims that the UFC was sabotaging a rising prospect out of ego, not logic. Why let a 7-0 fighter go? Became the central question, echoing across forums and Reddit threads. To many, it looked like the UFC valued control over competition. Then came Derek Brunson. Released in late 2023, despite a solid 16-8 record and wins over top middleweights, Brunson didn't hold back. He blasted the UFC's matchmaking politics, and when he signed a PFL contract worth over $300,000 per fight, it validated what many mid-tier veterans had been saying for years. The UFC rewards obedience, not always performance. But PFL's narrative wasn't without flaws. The Thiago Santos scandal hit hard. Once a respected title challenger who nearly dethroned Jon Jones, Santos tested positive for EPO in April 2023, one of 10 PFL fighters caught in the same anti-doping sweep. Dana White seized the moment, mocking PFL for preaching fighter freedom while failing to police PED use. The optics were devastating. Critics accused PFL of trading UFC's strict oversight for chaos. In early 2024, another domino fell. Marcin Tybura, a ranked heavyweight with a 10-8 UFC record, was suddenly released. Fans were baffled. Tybura wasn't washed up, and he'd just beaten names like Augusto Sakai and Andrei Arlovsky when he signed with PFL for $200,000 per fight and scored a first-round knockout in his debut. The contrast was clear. UFC was cutting costs while PFL was cutting checks. The pattern continued through 2025. Viviane Araujo and Ariane da Silva joined the PFL roster in September, bringing UFC experience and fan recognition. Both were still competitive in the rankings, yet released without much explanation. Outrage followed. To many, it looked like Dana White was trimming rosters for efficiency rather than legacy, while PFL capitalized on every discarded name to strengthen its women's divisions. And then came Sage Northcutt's return in December 2024, a full-circle moment in the great MMA migration. Once a golden boy prospect for the UFC before his stint in one championship, Northcutt's comeback under the PFL banner for $150,000 base salary symbolized a shift in the sport's balance of power. Fighters weren't just switching promotions anymore. They were switching philosophies. Sage Northcutt's signing wasn't just a feel-good comeback story, and it showcased the PFL's willingness to take calculated risks on fighters with injury histories or long layoffs. In contrast to the UFC's more cautious approach to roster building, these bold acquisitions steadily applied pressure to Dana White's business model. The seeds of this shift were planted back in 2022, when Shane Burgos left the UFC for the PFL, a move Dana White later admitted was a mistake. That admission became prophetic. One by one, fighters frustrated by UFC's pay, restrictive contracts, or limited matchmaking freedom began exploring PFL as a real alternative. For the first time in years, the UFC's once iron monopoly on elite talent was beginning to crack. And Don Davis, the PFL's outspoken co-founder, knew exactly how to exploit that crack. Throughout 2024 and 2025, Davis relentlessly trolled Dana White, publicly boasting that PFL's social media metrics rivaled UFC's, that their pay-per-views were outperforming major UFC cards, and that the league was on track to become the co-leader in MMA. Whether those claims held water didn't even matter, because they got under Dana's skin. White couldn't ignore him, and that alone kept PFL in the headlines, side by side with the world's biggest fight promotion. By October 2025, the numbers told the story. PFL had signed between 15 and 20 former UFC fighters since 2023, building real depth across multiple divisions. Meanwhile, UFC tried to counter by signing big names like Kayla Harrison from the PFL and Bellator. For the first time in history, the talent migration was flowing both ways, and the balance of power in MMA had never looked more unpredictable. The rivalry had escalated from subtle competition to outright promotional warfare. This wasn't just about who had the better fighters anymore. It was a battle for legitimacy, for the hearts of fans, the faith of investors, and the control of the sport's future. The tension reached its theatrical peak in October 2024, when Dana White erupted at the Power Slap 9 press conference. Responding to Don Davis's bold claim that the PFL had surpassed the UFC in multiple metrics, White went scorched earth mode, pulling out a printed stat sheet on stage. He dismantled PFL's narrative point by point. According to White, PFL's numbers didn't even come close, not even to Power Slap, his own controversial slap-fighting offshoot. He cited the data. UFC's social media posts drew around 500 million monthly views compared to PFL's 50 million. UFC's pay-per-view events regularly brought in audiences ranging from hundreds of thousands to millions, while PFL's remained a fraction of that. Major UFC cards averaged over 10 million viewers, whereas PFL hovered around 5 million. White's message was simple and brutal. PFL was talking like a contender, but the numbers said otherwise. Davis, however, didn't back down. His counterattack was all about selective metrics and strategic bravado. He claimed PFL's Battle of the Giants event in October 2024, headlined by Francis Ngannou, outperformed any UFC event that year, even outspending UFC 306 at the Sphere in production value. Then, with trademark confidence, Davis predicted that White would announce something big just to steal PFL's spotlight. And like clockwork, that's exactly what happened. Whether Don Davis truly believed his bold claims or simply recognized their marketing value didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that he'd succeeded. In the public eye, PFL was now competing at the UFC's level, and that perception had real-world consequences. The rivalry began reshaping fighter negotiations across the sport. For the first time in over a decade, athletes approaching free agency could credibly threaten to leave for the PFL, and mean it. The result? The UFC was suddenly forced to sweeten contract offers or risk losing top-tier talent to a promotion willing to pay premium rates and offer career flexibility. This marked a fundamental power shift. For years, the UFC had held a near monopoly over elite MMA, leaving fighters little choice but to accept whatever terms were offered. But now, PFL's emergence had introduced competition, and with it, leverage. Much of that appeal came from PFL's transparent tournament model. In its early seasons, each division's champion earned a $1 million prize, later adjusted to $500,000 in select 2025 weight classes. The structure was simple and revolutionary. Fighters knew exactly what they were competing for. No vague performance bonuses, no discretionary pay. Just win, and the prize is yours. For fighters long frustrated by the UFC's opaque bonus system, that clarity was refreshing and empowering. But the real game changer came with PFL's acquisition of Bellator MMA. Overnight, PFL evolved from a seasonal tournament into a full-scale global promotion. The merger added roughly 150 fighters to its roster, giving PFL the depth to run 30-plus events annually and operate year-round. For the first time, the UFC had a true structural rival, and not just a startup, but a promotion with broadcast deals, event infrastructure, and name-brand fighters. Still, major gaps remained. The UFC maintained a massive lead in international reach, pay-per-view infrastructure, and brand loyalty. And Dana White wasn't shy about pointing that out. His reaction to the Bellator merger was vintage Dana, equal parts mockery and menace. He scoffed at the idea of one struggling company buying another, quipping that PFL was doubling down on failure instead of solving its core problems. White's sarcasm dripped through every word as he called the acquisition. Absolutely genius, making it crystal clear that he meant the exact opposite. Meanwhile, PFL pressed forward with global expansion initiatives, looking to solidify its position as more than a North American alternative. PFL Africa, chaired by Francis Ngannou, and PFL Europe marked the league's next evolution, a direct challenge to the UFC's international dominance. These regional promotions targeted key territories where the UFC had established a foothold but hadn't yet achieved complete market saturation. PFL. Africa's goal was ambitious, reaching over 100 million African viewers. It wasn't just about competing with the UFC in North America or Europe. It was about building a truly global infrastructure to rival the UFC's worldwide reach. Meanwhile, the war of words between Dana White and Don Davis continued to escalate throughout 2024 and 2025, turning every press conference and media appearance into a proxy battle for MMA's future. Davis accused White of fearing PFL's growth, repeatedly proposing UFC PFL crossover superfights and framing PFL as the bold, innovative disruptor shaking up a complacent industry. White fired back by mocking PFL's financial sustainability, claiming that desperate promotions throw ideas at the wall hoping something sticks. Industry analysts were divided. Some saw this promotional warfare as a blessing for fighters, creating genuine competition that drove up pay and contract quality. Others viewed it as a distraction, spectacle overshadowing deeper issues like fighter healthcare, brain trauma, and the sport's unstable financial foundation. The optimists, however, believed the rivalry was exactly what MMA needed: true competition capable of driving innovation, reform, and better conditions across the industry. Financially, the data told a complex story. In 2025, the UFC generated $1.3 billion in revenue, a 15% increase from 2024, with pay-per-view events selling out arenas and drawing millions of viewers worldwide. The PFL, by comparison, earned an estimated $200 million, respectable but still far behind. Yet its October 2024 card featuring Francis Ngannou's debut drew a staggering 1.2 million PPV buys, proving that the promotion could deliver marquee events capable of rivaling the UFC's biggest nights. Then came the Paramount deal, a $7.7 billion partnership announced in September 2025, giving the UFC massive financial reinforcement and unparalleled distribution reach. PFL couldn't match those numbers, but its alliances with ESPN+, DAZN, and Saudi investors gave it a long enough financial runway to keep fighting and keep spending. The question was no longer whether PFL could survive. The money guaranteed that, but whether it could transform its financial firepower into sustainable growth and loyal fan engagement. Social media metrics became another battleground. Dana White's stat sheets consistently showed the UFC crushing PFL in raw numbers: 500 million monthly views versus 50 million, a 10-to-1 advantage that couldn't be ignored. Davis countered with a different narrative, emphasizing growth rates over totals. He argued that PFL's rapidly rising engagement percentage mattered more than the UFC's established dominance. Even the fighters themselves became part of the PR war. Some praised the PFL for its clear pay structure, contract flexibility, and willingness to allow boxing crossovers or even equity stakes. Others painted a harsher picture, citing scheduling chaos, late payments, and even salary reductions following the Bellator merger, in some cases, as much as 70% lower than their previous deals. The result? Neither promotion could fully claim the moral high ground. Still, the rivalry was having a tangible effect inside the UFC. Subtle but noticeable shifts began to appear in matchmaking and fighter recruitment. The UFC quietly implemented PFL-inspired evaluation systems for prospect contracts, showing that even Dana White's empire wasn't immune to competition-driven innovation, though he would never admit it publicly. The Contender Series expanded, signing 4 fighters per week, signaling a renewed push toward talent. Development and deeper rosters. By October 2025, one thing was undeniable. The promotional war between the UFC and PFL had permanently reshaped the landscape of mixed martial arts. The UFC still reigned supreme, with stronger finances, a deeper talent pool, and unmatched production value. But PFL had done the unthinkable. It had forced the king to fight to keep his crown. By late 2025, the PFL had firmly established itself as a legitimate alternative, not just another regional league destined to fold or get absorbed. The heated back and forth between Dana White and Don Davis, while entertaining, served both sides. Their rivalry kept mixed martial arts in the global spotlight and forced each organization to elevate its game, innovate, or get left behind. This new phase became known as the Reform Game, how PFL's rise exposed cracks in the UFC empire and forced long overdue change. For over 2 decades, Dana White's UFC, an $11 billion juggernaut, had faced criticism over fighter pay and restrictive contracts. But until now, those complaints lacked leverage. PFL's emergence, with alternative business models, guaranteed payouts, and open competition, transformed those grievances into real negotiating power for fighters. The reforms that followed weren't acts of generosity. They were acts of necessity, responses to competitive pressure that UFC could no longer ignore. In February 2025, UFC reached a $375 million settlement in its long-running antitrust lawsuit, exposing structural issues in how the company handled fighter compensation. The decade-long legal battle, launched in 2014, accused the UFC of suppressing wages, enforcing exclusive contracts, and controlling fighter likeness rights without fair pay. Unsealed court documents revealed internal communications about keeping salaries low and actively preventing rival promotions from gaining a foothold. Judge Richard Boulware's rejection of the UFC's initial $335 million settlement in August 2024 was a public rebuke, forcing the promotion back to the table and resulting in a higher payout, one that highlighted just how deeply fighter wages had been held down. Financial transparency changed the narrative. Court filings and Endeavor's 2022 reports showed UFC fighters earning just 13–20% of total revenue, compared to 50% or more in leagues like the NBA, NFL, and MLB. Even as UFC revenues surpassed $1.3 billion in 2025, entry-level fighters were still earning $12,000, $15,000 per fight. White defended the structure with his trademark phrase, "They eat what they kill." In his view, UFC's system was merit-based. Stars who sell fights get paid, and those who don't. But critics argued that this philosophy ignored the built-in promotional favoritism, matchmaking biases, and structural controls that determined who became a star in the first place. The PFL's contrasting approach magnified those flaws. With guaranteed tournament payouts, once as high as $1 million, later restructured to $500,000 in some divisions, and clear $50,000 challenger bonuses, PFL offered predictability and transparency. And when Francis Ngannou signed his historic PFL deal, reportedly worth over $2 million per fight, plus equity and boxing flexibility, it sent shockwaves through the industry. For the first time, a world champion had walked away from the UFC and made more money doing it. The ripple effects were immediate. In 2025, UFC raised its minimum fight purse from $12,000 to $15,000, a modest but symbolic 25% increase. Dana White linked the change to the $7.7 billion Paramount deal, suggesting new revenue would trickle down, though still stopping short of true revenue sharing or collective bargaining reforms. Health insurance remained a glaring gap. Unlike athletes in major leagues, UFC fighters continued to shoulder medical costs for training injuries and long-term health issues. Ngannou's departure, citing the lack of insurance as a key reason, exposed how far MMA remained from standard professional sports protections. The PFL's move to offer benefits and equity stakes to select fighters amplified that contrast. While not flawless, the principle alone, giving athletes ownership and security, represented an evolution that UFC had resisted for years. Under pressure, the UFC began testing pilot programs for elite fighters, though no widespread reform had materialized by October 2025. Meanwhile, Unsealed contract documents revealed how UFC's champion clauses and multi-fight lock-ins restricted fighter movement, often extending contracts automatically after a win. Combined with sponsorship bans and cross-promotion restrictions, UFC fighters had little control over their own careers. In contrast, the PFL allowed boxing crossovers, and Ngannou's paydays against Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua became proof of concept. His freedom became every fighter's dream, and Dana White's biggest headache. Even UFC's bonus system came under fire. The discretionary $50,000 Fight of the Night awards, while exciting, were unpredictable. Fighters couldn't plan around them. The PFL's transparent tournament structure, where every win had a clear financial reward, provided a stable and appealing alternative. UFC responded with expanded bonuses and contract sweeteners, especially for rising stars like Shara Magomedov, to prevent them from testing the PFL waters. In a rare admission, Dana White even conceded that letting Shane Burgos leave for the PFL was a mistake, a small but telling sign that competitive pressure was reshaping UFC's internal strategy. The differences extended too. Scheduling UFC fighters had no guaranteed activity level and could go months without a paycheck. PFL's structured tournament format offered clarity, fewer fights, but predictable paydays and defined goals. Outside the cage, a political battle brewed over the Ali Act. UFC's lobbying against applying the law to MMA was widely seen as an effort to preserve its favorable business model. Promoters like Eddie Hearn publicly questioned why MMA fighters didn't deserve the same legal protections as boxers, reigniting the debate over fighter rights and unionization. While no sweeping reforms had yet materialized, the conversation had shifted. PFL's presence sparked serious discussions about fighter unions, independent rankings, and standardized contracts, ideas that once felt impossible in a UFC-dominated world. By October 2025, the landscape of reform was incremental. Not revolutionary, UFC had raised base pay, improved bonuses, and fought harder to retain top talent. But the fundamental system remained intact. Low revenue shares, restrictive contracts, and limited benefits persisted. Yet, the difference was clear. PFL's competition forced UFC to evolve, even if only by inches. The sport's future now hinged on one question: could the PFL sustain its momentum? If it continued growing, attracting stars and fans, UFC would have no choice but to reform deeper. But if it stumbled or stalled, Dana White's empire would reassert itself, and change might fade back into empty talk. For now, MMA's evolution remains driven not by regulation or unions, but by rivalry. And sometimes, that's exactly what sparks real progress. That will be all for now, folks. To stay updated on trending fight news and everything shaping the future of MMA, click the card on your screen and join the conversation.